Hey you guys, and welcome back to episode 2 of our new Halloween series. And honestly, I swear I would have made more videos if our first episode did not take so long, and I honestly did not think that the research and all of that would take, and editing as well, would take the time that it did. But in all honesty, before I go ahead and I make my videos, I like to thoroughly research and plan what I am going to talk about, plan what I'm going to go ahead and put in the video, because I never want to go ahead and just rush and try to put out a video and I'm putting out misinformation, because this is still someone's life and they still have family members out there that may watch these videos. And so for episode 2 of our series, I felt like it was kind of appropriate to go ahead and pull out this case. And honestly, since I was a child, this case completely creeped me out. I saw a movie about it and I did not know at the time that it was based on a true story. And then when I, became an adult and I would research certain cases, I stumbled upon this one and it freaked me out so much, not only because of the suspicion surrounding it, but because of the fact that they never found out who the Zodiac killer was. And so if you guys watched the last video, and if you guys remember, we had briefly spoke about one of the possible suspects that had came out and was basically putting it out there to people that he knew that he was the killer of John Bennett, even though the police knew that he was not. And so this case kind of reminds me of that, because of basically how the Zodiac killer had been taunting the police for years. So Lover's Lane was just this dirt road off of Lake Herman's Road. Teens would go there, they would hang out, and the name basically explains it all. This area had been for the lovers, and this was a normal hangout spot that they would all go to. And so Betty Lou Jensen and David Farday, two 17-year-olds, had been anticipating a link up amongst each other. And so they decided to get in the car, into David's car, and just go over there as a little date, a little hangout, and chill. It was December 20th, 1968. A cold and crisp December night, and Christmas had been creeping up on everyone. Betty Lou and her man is chilling, and there's this young mom named Stella, and she's driving in the car with her daughter and her mother, and they're just on their way to go pick up Stella's son. And as they're driving down this road, she sees a car and it's just parked weirdly, and the door is wide open, and upon further inspection she sees a young man hanging out of the car. And now it could have just been a drunk teen, playing around, whatever, but she sees that there is blood all over his vehicle. And so Stella begins to get creeped out, and this is 1968, and so there's no cell phones on hand, so she can just, quickly call someone. She has her mom, and she also has her daughter in the car, if you guys can remember. And so she's like, let me go to the police station so they can handle it. And so on her way to the police station, she actually happens to luckily see a cop car, and she waves them down, and she's like, hey, listen, I just saw such and such, and you guys need to get down to the scene. And so it's well after 11, and the police arrives on the scene to this bloody, gruesome attack. David had been clinging to life at this point while Betty was gone. Betty Lou was pronounced dead on the scene, and she had actually been shot 5 times. She had been shot in her heart, her liver, and her kidney. David was shot in his head, but if you remember, I said when they arrived to the scene, he was clinging to life, and so they attempted to get him into the ambulance and rush him to the hospital. They were attempting to hurry up and get him some medical attention so they can get any sort of idea of who might have done this and why. But sadly, on the way to the hospital, David was pronounced dead. And so the police are literally confused at this point. There hadn't been any murders in the past 5 years, no activity. And these are 2 high school kids. These are 2 17-year-olds. And it's like, what kind of beef could they have? Who could have done this to these children? The 2 teens had been shot with a .22 caliber automatic pistol gun. And so the police department is a little bit rusty with it because, of course, they hadn't had to deal with this in the past 5 years. So they begin their investigation normally and they look into each of the victims' lives. They interview friends, family, whatever. Witnesses had stated that they saw Betty Lou and David, but they did not know that they was heading down to Lover's Lane. They just saw them, basically around the way. And police had also begun to start zeroing in on her ex, Betty Lou's ex, but nothing came of that. And so the police had nothing. They had no enemies. No one wanted to hurt them. No solid suspects that stuck out to them. And so for a while, this case pretty much went cold. July 4th rolls around and it's a hot summer day. Everyone is enjoying themselves, popping fireworks, whatever, just having fun, doing whatever it is that they did in the 60s. A pair of college kids decide to link up and hang out. 22-year-old Darlene and 19-year-old Michael M. So they had been in Darlene's car hanging out in Blue Rock Springs Park. Why can't I talk right now? A man approaches the car and the couple is probably like, damn, this is the only time we're getting to hang out to ourselves. And so the person approaches the couple's car and shines a light into the car, basically, like directly into Darlene and Michael's eyes. And they probably thought it was a police officer of some sort or whatever. And so he probably went from Darlene's side because she was said to be the driver. This is said to be her car. And so she probably thought she maybe did something wrong. But immediately shots flew into the car. I don't even know if there was any dialogue, but yeah. And right here at this very moment, I would have been like, I'm noticing a pattern. This man either does not like couples. I don't know what's going on, but he's shooting and he realizes that they are not dead. And so he comes back and he shoots some more and then he leaves. Darlene sadly succumbed to her injuries on impact, but Michael, he survived. And you'll see why I said it like that in a second. But once again, same situation. And you would think by now a connection would be made by the police, but not so much on them. And so with the boy surviving, this was huge for the police. And so, of course, Michael sees his attacker face to face. And so the description was secured. And the description given was a young white male seeming to be between the ages 25 to 30, stocky build, 200 pounds or larger, with light brown curly hair. I believe it was like sandy brown, they said. He stood about 5'8", with a large face, whatever that meant. Shortly after, the police receives a call from a man stating he killed those 2 kids and even the other ones. And remember, the police did not know this at first, that there was any type of connection, but now I'm guessing they were starting to see clearly. And this what leads me to believe that there should be more women on the force, honestly. Now, there had been a gap in between the first 2 killings, about 7 months, I believe, but the third, not so much. And so that leads us to August 1969. August 1st, 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald all received letters from this supposed killer. And so this cryptic letter had basically mentioned certain details that were very specific to the crime. And it had also been distinctive marks on there and symbols that I guess the killer placed. He wanted this note to be, he demanded they plastered it all over. He said that if they didn't follow through, lives would be on the line. And now the killer had put like these little codes in his letters, and it was said to reveal his identity or whatever if it was decoded. And so the police was literally being taunted by this man. And nobody for the life of them can decode this message. And so on August 8th, so just 7 days later after the note was put out, some random ass couple actually decoded this letter of symbols. The paper was flowing in, but the killings ceased for a while, but then in September. And so they're guessing this is why the killings this time was so close to each other. But September rolls around and lo and behold, some action happens. The 27th of September in Napa, Cali. So whoever this serial killer was, he was getting around California, just trying to basically terrorize the entire Cali. But this cute little couple was having this cute little picnic, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell. And basically this lonely man came up to them, made them tie each other up, and proceeded to stab each of them. Like, this man is literally the Grinch to couples. I honestly don't understand why they're the target. Maybe he went through something in his life, like a breakup or something, that was making him so triggered to go ahead and go after these couples, especially these young kids. Like, I just don't understand. And so at first, Cecilia was just minding her business while her man was going ahead and setting up the picnic, and she saw this creepy old guy just staring at them. And when she saw him, like when she caught him, he proceeded to go ahead and hide in the bushes. And so she taps Brian and she's like, I just saw a man. And she described this man as wearing this weird suit and basically hiding behind the tree. And so eventually the killer pops out and he has this pre-cut rope and he uses it to carry out his act, and he pulls out a knife and he uses that as well to carry out his act, proceeding to stab the couple after tying them up. Cecilia sadly died on the scene and did not survive, but the boy did. It's just like deja vu with this case. The girl not surviving sadly, but the boy surviving. I mean, thankfully they survived, but Brian, despite being stabbed six times, thankfully survived, and he was actually able to not only give a description of the guy that he was face to face with and killed his girlfriend and stabbed him, but he also was able to give an interview in the hospital after he recovered.
I considered him a robber. I had absolutely no thought that he was anything but that. And when we were at this robbery stage, I didn't consider any real threat to my life or to the girl or anything. I really didn't consider this, but I really wanted to help him. And
did he seem as though he would like your help at all?
No, he didn't, and he didn't even end up taking the money. But I
bear no grudge.
Well, of course not. I don't think that he was acting under his total complete consciousness. And when a man is, if you don't mind using the word sick, you can't hold this against them. But the real concern that I have is that he doesn't do this again. I'd like to see some people save this experience.
Like, this young man literally thought he was getting robbed and even offered the killer some damn money. Like, to me, that is honestly so sad. And so he describes this man, and the description offered is similar to the others. He describes this man as a 5'8" to 6 foot standing man, heavy set, stocky, with dark brown hair. This killer also went and wrote a little message at the side of Brian's car. And so if you notice, these are obviously the dates of all the killings. And soon after, on October 11th, 1969, in San Francisco, California, the fourth killing happened. And so I do want to go ahead and give my own little theory or opinion on this a little bit at the end of talking about it. I'm just going to leave it for the end because I just feel like the MO was switched up a little bit, and I do want to go into depth about that. So Paul Stine is on the job as a cab driver, and he goes ahead and he picks up a customer, obviously a random passenger, and he obviously thinks this is just a normal day. He's like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pick them up and drop them off at their destination. But he gets shot by this very same passenger just a block away from the destination. This time, though, the killer is seen by witnesses attempting to wipe his fingerprints or wipe something off of Paul Stine's car and attempting to flee the scene. Again, the description was given and it was basically the same. A white male, 25 to 30 years old, standing 5'8" to 6 feet. He was stocky and wearing a reddish brown crew neck and had glasses. And now somehow, some way, wires got crossed, communication was shitty, and basically the police thought that they were supposed to be looking for an African American male. And so you already know that the killer definitely taunted the police with this. And although he did attempt to wipe down any fingerprints left, they did recover a bloody fingerprint from the vehicle, but he claimed that he strategically put that there to go ahead and throw the police off. Personally, I don't know if I believe that. I do kind of feel like he got a little cocky and felt as if, since the police, was not catching him yet, that maybe he didn't have to do a thoroughly job with cleaning, or maybe he thought he did a thoroughly job with cleaning and actually, missed his spot and went ahead and told the police that just to throw them off. And so when the police arrived on the scene, the closest officers that was in the vicinity to go ahead and get to that call was the officers Donald Fook, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and Eric Zelms. And so they ended up, and this might be funny to y'all because it was kind of funny to me, I'm not even gonna lie, but it was said that they might have actually encountered the killer but let him go, thinking, remember the 911 call, I guess the wires got mixed up, whatever, and they thought they was looking for the black man as the perpetrator or whatever, and so they might have encountered him. It was basically described as the same guy, same build or whatever, but they left him alone and they watched him go away. And I'm sure this frustrated the police even more than them receiving those letters, because he was legit right there and they let him go. And no, this is not me blaming the police or coming down on the police. It's just a wild situation to me. And so after the murder of Paul Stein, another letter had been sent out. This letter was basically another taunt to the police. And so he stated that he killed the cab driver, and he even went as far to prove himself. He even went as far as attaching this piece of blood-stained shirt that he had ripped from poor 29-year-old Paul, a man that had just been trying to do his job. And honestly, him sending all these letters and taunting the police and doing all this stuff, I honestly felt like he was actually getting off on it. And so in that same letter, he even goes on to state that he was planning on putting a bomb in a flipping school bus, and as if he had not already been terrorizing the state enough, he even went as far as including the diagrams of this bomb to show, I guess, that he was serious. And the police at this point was over it. And so they created this special force task or whatever, and, for this specific situation. And it was made up of a bunch of policemen from different departments. But for some reason, the killings seemed to stop in 1971. Like, it was legit crickets, no bodies dropping, and the letters even ceased as well. But I do kind of want to circle back and talk about the change in his MO. This, to me and others, definitely stood out. Here is a serial killer that had basically been killing young couples, and, the way he was killing them with the gun. And not to go ahead and bring, TV shows into it, because TV shows are not real, but I did grow up watching Criminal Minds, and I'm very interested in crime and all that stuff, and I'm very familiar with motives, MOs, things like that. And so why did he not only change his weapon from gun to knife and then back to gun with Paul Stein, but also change the profile of his victim? Just a little something that I noticed while researching this case, and that really stood out to me. And so the last letters that have been sent out was in the year 1978. But before we go ahead and dive into that letter and the previous letters before that, I do want to go ahead and talk about other possible victims of the Zodiac killer. And then afterwards, one by one, we will go ahead and dive into the letters. And so there has been a couple of Zodiac killings that may or may not have been confirmed by the actual Zodiac killer. And yes, I know this case has more turns than a damn maze. Okay, so we are going to be beginning with Sherry Jo Bates, which is the most confirmed killing of the Zodiac other than the widely known ones. She had been very young. She was only 18 years old. And this killing had only been confirmed because there had been 2 letters that were sent out in March in the year of 1971. In this letter, the writer had been taking credit for the murder of Sherry Jo, and the writer had basically signed off as the Zodiac. And so that day on October 30th, 1966, Sherry Jo had went ahead and left a note for her father, letting him know that she was going to the RCC library. The next morning after Sherry Jo had left for the library, her body was found not too far from her car, actually. And again, the MO was changed. This poor girl was beaten, choked, and stabbed numerous times. And so the situation had occurred more than 400 miles south of San Francisco. And sadly, even with all the investigation that they were doing, they hit nothing but dead ends, and this case went to the cold case files. And so basically nothing came of it. And so let's go ahead and quickly fast forward to the year 1970, March 22nd, 1970 to be exact. A young mom and her baby, she was going ahead and traveling to Puta Loma, never heard of it, but she was going to go ahead and see her mother. I am guessing that she was in her car having a bit of car troubles when a motorist signaled basically with his flash for her to go ahead and pull over. Miss Jones goes ahead and she takes the offer, and shortly after, this man threatens to kill this young lady and throw her child out, basically just dash her child away. And now, mind you, Kathleen is 7 months pregnant and she has her daughter, and so I'm sure she's legit in fight or flight mode at this point. The plan was for quote unquote the Zodiac to go ahead and drive Mrs. Johns and her child to the gas station, because remember, she had issues with the wheel of her car. But this man ended up driving them around for legit 2 hours, basically threatening her, scaring her, up until Jones decides to take her baby, wrap her baby up, and jump out of this man's vehicle. An hour later, her car was found intentionally set on fire on Highway 132, I believe it was. And so Kathleen did not go ahead and report this, but they knew that this was one of the Zodiac, could have been one of the Zodiac's crimes, because he had confirmed it in a letter. And again, when I go ahead and revisit the letters, we will talk about that. And I'm not going in any particular order with the victims. So next up, we do have Raymond Davis. And so a lot of people feel, and reports state, that this local cab driver might have definitely been a victim of the Zodiac killing. And so the situation happened on Oceanside, California. And this cab driver had also been 29, so similar situation to the late Paul Stein. And so all of this went down on April 10th, 1962. And on April 9th, so just a day earlier from the murder, there had actually been a call to the police department. And on the other line, the person had stated, I am going to pull something here in Oceanside and you'll never figure it out. So same tactic like how the Zodiac killer would, just basically taunting the police, this time with a phone call. The next day, Mr. Davis' body was found between the current and the former mayor's home. And I feel like with the body being put there, it was most likely a statement from the Zodiac killer, just basically saying, hey, look at me, I'm, putting it by the mayor's home. You guys are never going to be able to find me. You guys are never going to be able to figure it out. Just a part of his whole narcissism, taunting tactic. Now, what is even stranger is the fact that the police had received another call way before reporting the April 9th call. Obviously, they did not see the connection in the beginning, but now they do feel like this has to be the same individual. And so in this call, the individual states, do you remember me calling last week and I had been telling you about the baffling crimes I was going to be committing? He goes on to state, I killed that cab driver and I'm going after a bus driver next. Mind you, nothing like this has ever happened before. So the Oceanside police is like, what the hell is going on? And the same gun, the same kind of gun that had been used for the Lake Herman killings was the same type of gun used for this killing. So a lot of similarities going on with these situations and some of the Zodiac killings. So a lot of people felt like, okay, he definitely did these. On February 21st, 1970, we have a Vietnam War vet, John Hood, and his fiancée, and they are visiting a beach in Santa Barbara. And the name of this beach was East Beach. They were said to have left their home at 6 p.m., which is really late to get to the beach, but I guess they wanted to get there pretty early. And somehow, someway, John and his fiancée Sandra, they was found dead the next morning. They was found face down, fully clothed, and they had the blanket that they had brought with them covered over them. Sandra was said to be unrecognizable, and John, he had suffered from 11 stab wounds. They found the 4-inch knife that had been used covered under the blanket, and it was partially like covered with sand or whatever, and no sexual assault or robbery, and so that was ruled out. But like, it was very similar to all the other cases, especially Hartnell and Shepard. I believe it was also like on like a little picnic thing, and so that is one of the reasons why a lot of people feel like this is one of the Zodiac's doings. Next up, we have Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Alright, so in 1972, a press release was held by the Santa Barbara County Department. During this press conference, they had been going ahead and talking about the 1963 murder, and it had been confirmed that this was most likely a Zodiac killing. And honestly, it's like it's always a couple. I don't get it, a young couple at that, but let's continue. It was stated that young Robert Domingo and his wife Linda was shot to death on the beach on June 4th, and had actually been their senior ditch day. And so while these kids were supposed to be outside, going ahead and enjoying this free pass to ditch school, these two young kids was fighting for their lives. Thankfully, they had went ahead and told some friends that they were heading down over to the beach, and so when they did not show up the next day, their family was obviously confused, and so police went ahead to the beach and started their investigation, and that's when they found the couple. And so it was reported that the killer had probably attempted to bind these victims, and then they actually freed themselves, and that's when he reportedly shot them in the back and the chest, and not one time but repeatedly. And oddly enough, the same .22 caliber weapon had been used during this attack. This killer even tried to go ahead and put their bodies in some sort of shack and then try to burn it down, but his attempt at burning it down failed. And another odd thing was the fact that the same ammunition that had been used by the Zodiac killer was the same ammunition used for this crime. During the mid-afternoon on June 2nd this same year, a sniper had actually shot into a crowd of teenagers just standing and hanging around and talking. And with all the cases of these young couples getting hit, none of the children at the time was hit, thankfully. And they discovered that earlier that month, April, a Santa Barbara store sold the exact same ammunition that had been used on the Santa Barbara murders, and the only other ammunition that had, the only other store that held that ammunition had been this store called Vanderburg Air Force Base. And of course, the police went ahead and did their investigation. And that brings us to February 5th, 1964. A newlywed couple whose names were Johnny and Joyce. And I just want to make a side note, the pitch of my voice changed because it was the night before, and now it is the next day. And so I kind of probably sounded so drained, sleepy, whatever before, but hopefully the audio is completely different now. And so this was a recently married couple. I mean, they were literally on their honeymoon at this moment. They were walking on Ocean Beach located in San Diego. And so at the time, in the beginning, the killer had been located on a cliff, and he shot at them from that cliff. And he went down, got off the cliff, went close range to them, and went to finish the job, shooting them both in the head for no apparent reason at all. And so despite being shot 5 times, Johnny survived, but he survived only for 5 hours. And Joyce, she died off impact. She was shot in the back, the arms, her legs, and died instantly. Johnny had also been shot behind his ear, which was very, very similar to most of the Zodiac killer's victims. This time, though, the MO changed once again, and the killer took the victim's watch and his wallet. And so to me, that was really, really creepy, and it kind of stood out to me because the Zodiac was not known for just taking items or whatever. He was known for the killing, and then so this to me seems like either a robbery gone wrong or most likely a copycat. Another creepy thing about that is the fact that the same Timex watch that had been taken from Johnny was the same Rolex watch that had been found at the crime scene of Sherry Joe's murder. And so with all that new information, you really have to sit and think and ask yourself, is this really the work of a copycat? And like I stated before, Johnny did not survive. He survived for about 5 hours, and when he was taken to the hospital, he sadly succumbed to his injuries. And so, of course, they still had to go ahead and do their investigation, and they investigated, questioned his friends, his family. But his mother said there was no enemies that she had known about, no one that would want to hurt her son. So at this point, the police was hitting dead end after dead end. They had been referring to the murders of Johnny and Joyce as thrill kills. But Johnny's sister was not jacking that at all, and she had a strong gut feeling that these murders were a part of the Zodiac killings. They also feel that there is a link or connection or whatever to the Edwards and Domingo case, but that also has not been confirmed, and I'm honestly not sure if it will be confirmed anytime soon. And I say that mostly because with this case, it is so many twists and turns and suspects, victims, so many information, and just not a lot of evidence that is able to stick. But for this murder, they did have a suspect that they did have in mind other than the Zodiac killer, which was a 51-year-old man who had lived on a shack on the beach, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just the information that they give, he was in close proximity, and so I guess that's why they basically mentioned that. But he had gotten complaints from people that was saying that he was very violent, and they also had a 19-year-old Marine who was accused of killing his mother and his sister. That was a suspect, but that is all the information that we have. And as you can see, it's basically a pattern with most of these cases, just going cold with no more information, no more leads to go ahead and pursue. And yes, you guys, I know it's a lot of information, so I really, really hope you guys are keeping up, because researching it was so much I got confused. So I do know it's a lot of information to take in. But this Marine, he had went ahead and committed this crime in Illinois, so not far from the Zodiac, but not in close proximity. We know that he frequented mostly around the California area, and so this is why I said this case has so much twists and turns that just lead to so many dead ends. It's just honestly frustrating. Now, just circling back to Joyce, there were two men that took a special interest in her necklace when she had been traveling with family on her way to California. And it's not further explained what type of interest they took or how this encounter went down. But what we do know is that when Joyce had been murdered, her necklace had been taken. And so police at this point is just trying to find any sort of connection to help them, any solid information that will stick. And honestly, I do not blame them. This man is running rampage, rapid through freaking California, creating havoc, and they have no solid leads at this point. Every time they run into something, they hit a dead end. And so it was also pointed out the fact that most of these murders had taken place by the ocean. So they felt like the ocean might have been some sort of significance for the Zodiac killing, but nothing else was further pursued with that theory. And so exactly a month later, on November 29th, a letter had been sent over, and obviously not just any identical letter, a typewritten letter, and it had been mailed to the Riverside Press Enterprise. This letter was titled The Confession. And so I mentioned this before, but I did want to go ahead and save it for later, but I'm just going to go ahead and bring it up now. And so the writer of this letter went ahead and claimed the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. And if you guys remember, when the police had been investigating, they hit multiple dead ends. And the writer even went ahead and showed evidence of this and provided specific details that wasn't even released to the public. And so this is how they knew that he might have been the killer of Sherry Jo Bates. Either that or this was some sick individual that was on the police force just fucking with the police. But it's honestly, what are the chances of that? And now we are going to move on to the last victim, last but not least. And last but not least, we have Richard Radich, and I really hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Okay, so in the month of June, in the year of 1970, around 5:25 a.m., 25-year-old sergeant, he had been gunned down by 3 shots from a .38 caliber, a caliber revolver, and at the time he had been sitting in the squad car on duty. And of course, he was on the job. He was going ahead trying to serve a ticket, and the shot came from the side of the vehicle. After his death, the department went ahead and began to add 2 officers to each patrol car, just so they're not alone, by themselves, and they have backup reinforcements right with them. Sadly, Richard passed away 16 hours after he was attacked. As I am sure that you know, the Zodiac was not gonna let the police just think that this was some random attack. And so he went ahead and he took credit for this crime in one of his letters. And of course, the police again attempted to investigate but hit nothing but dead ends. And so that brings us to the letters. First ever letter from the Zodiac had been sent out July 31st, 1969, so just shy of a year after the very first murder. And the police at the time did not know that it was connected, but in this letter, they found out. And so he sent out 3 different copies. He sent out one to the San Francisco Chronicles, the San Francisco Examiner Office, and also the Vallejo Times Herald. And in the letter, it had these weird like encrypted symbols or whatever and letters and stuff just all over it, and nobody knew what the hell it meant. And it also took credit for the December 20th 1968 murders and the recent murders that happened July 4th 1969. And to go ahead and confirm that he had been telling the truth, he included some details from the murders that no one knew about, only him and the police. And so the police knew, like, yep, this is definitely our guy. But if only they had a face to match. A couple did go ahead and decode this letter just a couple days later. Those like symbols or whatever had all over it, and this is what it read. I like killing because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing a wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. And so not too long after that, the second letter came out. And now the second cipher or letter or whatever you want to call it, it had been sent out to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. It contained 340 characters and it had only been solved just 5 years ago. Well, almost 5 years ago. And it was solved by a team of like code breakers or whatever. The names were David, Blake, and Van. Now the third cipher, they said that it was the hardest to decode. Although not a lot of people were able to decode it, they were. And so this letter even contained some misspellings. And with this letter sent out, this was the first time he referred to himself as the Zodiac. Now on October 13th, 1969, that was when he went ahead and began taunting the police for them mistaking his identity and basically letting him go. And that is also when he mentioned bombing the school bus and even inserting the diagram, which legit scared everyone, rightfully so. Now the letter that he sent out on November 9th, 1969, he postmarked this letter to the Chronicles and he went ahead and inserted another piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. It also contained this weird humorous greeting card along with another bunch of homework for them to decode with the whole symbol thing that he would taunt them with. Now the one sent on November 9th had been legit 7 pages long, and this had actually been deemed the longest message from the Zodiac to the police. In this one, again, he included bombs and diagrams for it and plans for it. Like these plans were legit premeditated. And so that brings us to the next letter, December 20th, 1969. Now this time he specifically addressed this letter to Melvie Belly. He was in fear that he would go ahead and kill someone again and was pleading for basically Melvin to help him. It is obviously unclear what came about with that because his identity was not known, so we don't know if Melvin was ever able to, reach back out to him, help him one-on-one. We don't know. Obviously, if that was to happen, we would have known his identity. But now onto the April 20th, 1970 letter. This letter also included a 13 cipher along with another diagram of a bomb that he wanted to use to hurt children. Like, I honestly cannot even begin to imagine what was going on in this man or woman's head or life for them to even want to do certain things like this. On April 29th, 1970, this was when he was enforcing for the police to go ahead and add some Zodiac buttons to their uniform. And of course, they did not do it and they thought it was silly, and this enraged him. And on June 26th, in the year of 1970, he sent yet another letter to the Chronicle. So with a map and a crossed circle over the area that had Mont Diablo. And as I'm sure you guessed it, another code. This time it had been to locate a bomb. This was truly some sick like weird, demented game for this man or woman, whoever this was. The Zodiac, or whoever this writer was, had also addressed the fact that he killed another victim. Now, a couple months later, July 26th, he sent out yet this other long dissertation, whatever you want to call it. This time though, instead of it being 5 pages, instead of it being 7 pages, it was 5 pages. I don't know, to me it's like this man or woman had legit no one to talk to, and this was their only source of outlet or whatever, the way that they express themselves or get their rocks off or whatever. He legit treated the police like his diary or whatever to express these murders. Now, another sick thing he did was describe the type of torture he did to all his victims. And so the next one isn't confirmed, but we had previously spoke about Donna Lass and her murder. And so with that being said, yet another postcard was received, and this time in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. The phrases, and I quote, "Past Lake Tahoe," it said, "Past Lake Tahoe areas and South victims 12." And so a lot of people had been connecting this letter and her murder, basically saying she was the 12th victim. They also felt like there was some special clue or connection within this letter, and Miss Lass had actually, weird enough, had worked nearby the area that the Zodiac had actually murdered one of his victims. And so a lot of people feel like this connection is too much to just overlook. On October 5th, 1970, another postmarked card was received. This one, though, is also unclear as to whether it came from the Zodiac. So in this particular letter, it had like a bunch of these text clips that were like cut out from different sources or whatever. It read, "The pace isn't any slower, but in fact, it's just one big," and then it cuts off. But in place of that, it's like a piece of cut, like comic book strip or whatever, and that particular piece of paper read "Smudgeons." On October 27th, so just 4 days shy of Halloween, I'm sure you guys can guess it, the Chronicle had received yet another postmarked letter. This one had actually had a Halloween card attached to it, and it was addressed to a specific person. The name that was put was Avery, but it was actually spelled Averly, so I think it was like purposely misspelled. And also the number 14 had been placed there, and a lot of people feel like that's a reference number to how many victims he had been up to at that time. On March 13th, 1971, this was the letter that he went ahead and took credit for the murder of Sherry Joe. And if you guys can remember, a lot of people had been battling with the fact that if he had really been the killer of Sherry Joe, or if this was the work of a copycat. And then on January 29th, in the year of 1974, the quote-unquote Zodiac, he had actually alluded to a possible suicide using yet another TV show or movie basically to mask it as a code. And his childish self basically put him 37, police 0, basically alluding to the fact that he caught 37 victims and the police still does not have him in custody or even know who he is. So basically whatever sick game he thought they was playing in his head, the police were losing. A month later, on February 14th, 1974, he went ahead and addressed the SLA, also known as the Symbionese Liberation Army. And if you guys are not familiar with what that is, I am going to go ahead and just put the definition on the screen. At the end of this message, he signed a friend. So it wasn't his usual Zodiac, or there was no symbols or no codes to go ahead and decode. So a lot of people feel like that is not the Zodiac. On May 8th, yet another message had been received by the Chronicle. This time it was labeled a citizen. So again, this writer is not referring to himself as the Zodiac anymore. And in this letter, the writer went ahead and complained about the glorification of crime, basically, and how they show it in newspapers, how they express it in ads, and he basically just wanted them to stop showing it altogether. And the last ever confirmed letter from the Zodiac was dated on July 8th, 1974. And in this letter, the writer, or quote-unquote the Zodiac, had yet another complaint. And this one had actually name dropped a specific man, and it had been about Marco Spinelli, and it talked about how he suffered from this serious psychological disorder. This writer also expressed that he felt like Mr. Spinelli needed to be quote-unquote sent back to the hole. And again, instead of being signed the Zodiac, this time it was signed the Red Phantom. No other letters had been sent out by any alias or the Zodiac since 1974. And so that brings us to the suspects on this case. Alright, first up, you guys, we have a man who was an author of a best-selling memoir, and his name was Gary Stewart. This man strongly believed that his father was the Zodiac killer. So just a little quick backstory. When his mother was 14, she had got pregnant with him by his father. I'm sure his father was a lot older. But soon after, the father had went on to abandon the two. And not only did he abandon them, but he left little Stewart in a building in the stairway by himself as an infant. The resemblance between Mr. Stewart's father and the Zodiac killer is uncanny. That is why a lot of people feel like he was the Zodiac killer. But he was not. There was many issues that they ran into trying to prove whether or not he was the Zodiac killer. Now a test on his handwriting had been done, and they had been just basically trying to see if he was a match to any of the letters that had been sent. And to go ahead and test this theory, they went ahead and looked at his marriage certificate. The handwriting had been a match, but the only issue was it was not Stewart's father's handwriting. The handwriting found on his marriage certificate had been the priest that sworn them into marriage. And besides that, there was just no evidence to go ahead and pursue him or see him as a suspect. And so the police just hit a dead end with that. DNA had been pulled from one of the Zodiac's crimes, and it had resurfaced back in 2002, and this was major news. If you guys remember, the fingerprint was recovered, and so he wanted the fingerprints, of course, to be tested just to see if it would be a match to the Zodiac. He is like, you can test me whatever you need to do to get back down to the bottom of this. But the police refused. And so that leads us into suspect number 2. And so a man named Robert Gary Smith, he strongly believed that another man named Arthur Allen was indeed the Zodiac killer. And this man, Mr. Smith, he had a strong, crazy obsession with trying to find the Zodiac killer. I feel like everyone had their phase of trying to figure out who this man or woman was. But he wrote 2 books pertaining to this case with all the information that he could find. And I don't know how personally close he was to Mr. Allen, but it was stated that on the day of the 3rd murder, Allen had went ahead and told his family he had been going scuba diving near the area, that about 2 years later, Don Shaney, a friend of Mr. Allen, they had supposedly been having a conversation, and in that conversation, Allen had referred to himself as the Zodiac. And keep in mind, this was supposed to be way before the Zodiac had been calling himself that. Now, I'm not too sure how believable that is because I wasn't there, I wasn't a fly on the wall, but you guys can see how creepy and ironic that is if it was true. But truly, we don't know because this is literally he say, she say. He had even told his friend that he wanted to hurt humans and hunt them, and even use flashlights to flash in their eyes and just a bunch of weird things. And it's honestly so weird because I can't even begin to imagine how that conversation went about or how it started. Like, who hears that and then does not do anything about it? Maybe he didn't take him seriously, thought he was joking, but who jokes like that? Like, honestly, sir, what did you do after hearing that? And so Allen was interviewed by the police twice. And during the interview, I don't know if the police had asked him, oh, what was your favorite book? Or if he just came out and just told them. But for whatever reason, he told the police that his favorite book was The Most Dangerous Game. And if you're unfamiliar with what this book is about, it's basically a book about haunting people. Now, like I said, they probably asked him, but the creepy part about this whole thing is the fact that the Zodiac actually mentioned this book in one of his early letters, his first ever letter, actually. Another really crazy detail was the fact that this man had even owned a Zodiac brand watch, and it contained the same exact symbol that the Zodiac would go ahead and use in his letters to talk to police. And so, of course, they had to go do their investigation, and they went to his house that he was living at the time, the trailer, and they found in his freezer dissected animals. They found in the home bloody knives and sexual devices. Allen was convicted of child molestation in 1974. And if you guys can remember, earlier I mentioned that's when the Zodiac letters stopped, and that's when it seemed like the Zodiac, began to go quiet. And Allen had went ahead and served 3 years for that charge, which to me is not enough, which disturbs me. I feel like he should have got more. But we are going to go ahead and take it back to the year 1987. An inmate had actually went and expressed to the police that when he was roommates with Allen had told him that he killed a cab driver. Again, obviously it could have been anyone, but given the other details we have, it's pretty strange. And it's still he says, she says, so we don't really know. We just have to take it with a grain of salt. But it's just really weird if it is true that he's just going around expressing these crimes to strangers. In 1991, Detective George had went ahead and interviewed one of the Zodiac surviving victims, Michael, and he took him to go see a lineup of a bunch of photos. Of course, Michael was asked to go ahead and identify the man that hurt him, and he picked out Allen. Of all the photos that was there, he picked out Allen. So it's like, could Allen be the Zodiac killer, or was he, a copycat of the Zodiac killer? We don't really know, but they did go ahead and search his home again, I guess just going off of a hunch, and they found formulas of bombs, constructed bombs, as well as, weirdly enough, tapes about the Zodiac. When they went ahead and interviewed Allen, he had actually stated that he knew absolutely nothing about what was going on, what was found in his home, or anything about the Zodiac killer. So he was basically pleading the fifth. So of course they went ahead and they tested the DNA that they had since from 2002, and Allen was not a match. It's like frustrating because all the signs was seeming to kind of sort of point to him, but him not being a match was a very, very major thing. In 1971, they went ahead and took his prints, but nothing. His handwriting was also not a match to the Zodiac. But with that, it's like, I don't know, because he could have purposely disguised his handwriting either when he was writing the letters or when he was going ahead and testing, or whenever, to go ahead and to just disguise himself. But I guess one of the biggest things was that people felt like he did not resemble the Zodiac at all. And if you see him, you can see that he does not look like the sketch at all. But Allen had still been looked at as a prime suspect in this case. And that brings us to suspect number 3. A man named Harvey Hines strongly believed that Lawrence Kane was possibly the Zodiac killer. In the year of 1962, Mr. Kane was in a very bad accident which caused him to suffer from brain damage. And those around him stated that after this, he just began to lose it. Darlene's sister, and if you guys remember, Darlene was one of the Zodiac's victims, confirmed victims. She stated that her sister was being stalked by Kane, and this had supposedly happened in the weeks leading up to her murder. Kane had even lived just a 6-minute walk from the location that the cab driver had actually picked up his killer. The Vallejo police even pointed out the fact that Mr. Kane either lived close into the vicinity that the other victims had lived, or they were killed. In the year of 1970, he went ahead and moved to Lake Tahoe. And we know that this is the area where a possible victim of Zodiac killer Donna Lass had last been seen and disappeared. And the woman who escaped, thankfully, from the Zodiac with her child. Do you guys remember her? Kathleen. Yes, Kathleen. She was asked to point out the person who had, been in the car with her for those 2 hours, that she spent those 2 hours with after the situation with her car. And she had actually pointed out Cain. Mind you, she spent 2 hours with this man in fear. I'm pretty sure she remembered every single detail about that night, especially his face, and so her pointing him out in the lineup was very, very huge. But the only issue with this whole thing was the fact that his handwriting did not match that of the Zodiac killer. Okay, you guys, let's jump right into our next suspect. So we are going to go ahead and fast forward to the year 2000. We'll rewind in our case because it's 2024, but being that we were in 1969, we are going to jump to 2000. Approximately the year 2007, there had been this man named Dennis Cofford, and he strongly believed his father that had passed away prior in the year 2006 was the Zodiac killer. Dennis ran to go ahead and give them any sort of samples that they can use to go ahead and test against the evidence that they had. And I am not too sure what came about that. I tried to look it up, but I am not too sure what happened. If they even took the samples, what happened after that, the aftermath is unclear. But he did state that he had retrieved one of his father's quote-unquote bloody knives, as well as the hood, the famous hood that the Zodiac would wear. The man's father's name was Jack, and Jack had even owned military-style boots. And yes, of course, and anybody could own military-style boots, especially back then, but it was very, very specific to the one that the Zodiac wore. A lot of people outside of his family also felt that Jack looked exactly like the sketches. Now, moving on to our next suspect, we have a woman named Deborah Perez, and in the year of 2009, Deborah had actually been convinced that her father was to the Zodiac killer. Like, a lot of people was just throwing their families under the bus. Like, she felt that her father resembled this man too much. She had also went on to make claims that she had even been in attendance of one of these murders, which is like, who brings their whatever. And she had also made claims that her father made her write some of these Zodiac taunting letters to the police. Deborah had also reported that she had Paul Stein's glasses. And so we don't know how true this is, because all of this was not confirmed, nor did Miss Perez ever even, put a picture of her father out, just so we can kind of do our own little comparison and research. So when it came to this claim, a lot of people just discarded it. So Paul Stein's biological sister, he goes ahead and tells the police that there had been this unknown man that nobody in his family knew that had attended his funeral. When they had approached this man and asked this man, "Hey, who are you? What is your name?" He replied that his name was Richard Golowski. Now, keep in mind, this is a man that his family had not been familiar with at all. And this man had actually worked for the San Francisco Underground newspaper. This newspaper company ran from 1968 to 1972. So basically around the same time, the same duration of the time the letters have been being sent out. Awfully enough, this had been the same newspaper company that had just been posting these weird stories, these weird violent stories against other people. And this facility was closed on Wednesdays, just one day out of the week, and that was the day that none of the Zodiac letters had been sent out. So just a little important detail that stuck out to a lot of people. This newspaper office had also been oddly close to the scene where Paul Stein had been murdered. And it said that Paul Stein's shirt had been ripped the same way a medic would have ripped for a tourniquet. And it was reported that this Richard guy did go ahead and do some medic work during his time in the army. It had also been stated that he liked to go ahead and shorten his last name and spell it very oddly, spelling it G-I-K-E or G-Y-K-E. And oddly enough, both of these names, the same spelling, was referenced in a lot of the Zodiac letters. Richard, and we don't know if this is true or not, but he did have this coworker that had been saying that Richard was trying to recruit him for some of the killings, but of course he did not take debate. And it had also been noticed that one of the dispatchers that had received the call from the Zodiac, the alleged call from the Zodiac, when she had heard Richard's voice, she immediately connected it to the Zodiac's voice. And although Richard did die in the year of 2004, the police did do a lot of investigating on him, and they came up empty-handed. So nothing came of their investigation, and there was no evidence to go ahead and prosecute him or even label him as the Zodiac. A weird thing though had been the fact that he had spent some time inside the psych ward in 1971, and that's around the same time that the Zodiac letters had stopped. And so even though nothing came of this, a lot of people really felt like he had been the Zodiac or even a helper because of how close of a suspect he seemed. Okay, so now we are going to go ahead and move on to suspect number 6. And this is going to be our last strongest possible suspect for the Zodiac killer. There was this group of individuals that called themselves the Case Breakers, and I think their stage name basically just pretty much sums up what they do for work and what their purpose is. And so a couple of years back, basically it came out that they had actually solved the Zodiac case, and they felt as if Gary Francis Poste was their man. And now at this point, everybody's like, yes, finally, we caught the guy, and finally, the Zodiac's identity is revealed. Now, of course, this has not been yet confirmed by the investigators on the actual Zodiac case, and it's been reported that Case Breakers and the investigator, they have no ties with each other and they aren't working with each other on the case. The case, of course, had still been far from over. And so just a little backstory on Mr. Gary Poste. He had been born in New York City and actually served in the Air Force. He then went on to be a painter who primarily focused on houses. He was married and they shared one son together, and in the year of 2016, he was actually charged with battery against his wife. Gary had been 78 when this happened, and after he served some time in prison, he went ahead and got sent to a senior facility. Gary suffered from dementia, and that's why he could not stand trial for the battery against his wife, but he was able to stand up and assault his wife. So I don't understand that. But a lot of people feel as if he was the Zodiac killer because of his forehead, and not just his forehead, but the characteristics of his forehead, meaning the wrinkles. And that is what made them feel as if he was the Zodiac, because he closely resembled the description. In the year of 2017, a journalist had came out and said that he had sworn statements from this Mr. Gary stating that he was actually the Zodiac killer, that he confessed. He also had 2 former cellmates that came out stating that they had also heard the confession of him being the Zodiac and was threatened after. And it's like, why tell somebody and then threaten them? It doesn't make any sense. But a book about Mr. Gary had been made, and the connections possibly for him being the Zodiac killer, but that book has yet to be released, and so we don't know any other details that this author may have against Gary. People had strongly felt like he was the Zodiac. Like this had been the rumor that been going around at the time, that it was Gary, and people were stuck on that idea. And so while he had been in jail, the police went ahead and did their interviews with him, but nothing came of that, and the case is still open. No details of his interview have been released, and so up until now, we are in the dark with that. We don't know what is going on with that. She had a blob up, I'm not gonna say a blob up hair. She had some hair that was like in her hand, tucked in her hand, and she also had like some gunk or whatever under her nails. But the investigators never tested this. For whatever reason, they saw it and never went ahead and tested it. Now, some people saw some possible connections or red string theory, whatever, between Sherry and Gary. Now, Gary would go ahead and get medical checkups just 15 minutes from the scene where Sherry had been murdered. And if you guys can remember earlier when I was introducing Gary, I mentioned that he was a painter. and there had been a watch that was retrieved from the crime scene of Sherry Bates, and this watch had splashes of paint on it. Could it possibly be a connection to Gary and Sherry? Who knows? But that is what was reported. But a lot of people felt like this was not one of the Zodiac killings, only because the only connection that they had from the Zodiac and Sherry was that letter that had been sent out, which years later, wicked information came out about that letter. So in 2016, there was another letter that had been sent out stating that that letter that confessed to the Sherry Joe Bates murder was actually a hoax. And so they go ahead and they test this letter, the handwriting. And when they test it, they find that the handwriting matches the same handwriting from the Joey Bates murder confession letter. So whoever sent out that letter stating that it was a hoax had also sent out the initial confession letter. Could it have been the Zodiac, or could it have been a copycat confessing and then trying to retrace his steps? Who knows? A spokesman from the Riverside Police Department had came out stating that they were 100% positive that Sherry Joe Bates was not one of the Zodiac's victims. And even if they felt as if Gary Poste was the killer of Sherry Joe Bates, they could not go ahead and pursue him as a suspect or, bring charges against him because he died at 80 years old. And Fox News did go ahead and try to attempt to talk to his family, but they got nowhere with that and hit nothing but dead ends and closed doors. A man named Glenn Barnes had went ahead and made a couple of Facebook posts a whole Facebook page actually dedicated to Gary being the Zodiac killer and him knowing Gary and saying he was going to miss him and wondering if he was the possible, Zodiac killer in the post that he made. But nothing else came of that page, those posts, or this case, and the page is still up if you guys want to go ahead and check it out. But this case still remains the most famous unsolved case out there, and we know that because this is confirmed not only by the San Francisco Police Department but also the FBI. And so that leads us to the end of this video, because this video was a very long video, and so if you made it to the end of this video, just go ahead and just put your thoughts and your opinions of or theories of what you may think happen, or who the Zodiac may possibly really be, if it's one of the suspects or if it's someone else. I want to hear you guys' theories and what you guys think in the comment section. But that was it for this video. Stay safe, and I will see you guys in the next one.